born and a daughter. Isaac and Nancy had only recently met, and their families, both German immigrants, had moved from the east. The Roops were 5 generations. Originally they came from Carroll County, Maryland, where my father was born. And the Gardners, John and Jane, came from the Allegheny County area of Pennsylvania. John was a wagon maker. So as you can see, as what happened in that era, many families settled together with their relatives, their friends, and oftentimes they stayed for generations in that area. So it was quite unusual that the Roops moved, and as you'll find out, myself leaving and moving to California. Back in 1841, when I was born, my father set up a grist and sawmill. That was his new venture. And as the young couples did, soon came my brother John. 2 years later, after I was born in 1841, along came John in 1843, and then Isaiah in 1845. So we had a wonderful, happy little family, busy family. My father was busy at the saw and grist mill, which provided lumber, wheat, essential supplies for the local citizens there. And when he wasn't busy working, and Mom, of course, with 3 young babies, had her hands full too, in the evenings you could find Papa Isaac with his book in his hand and his pen, writing under the instruction of his young wife, Nancy, who, when she was a teenager, attended Transylvania College in Lexington, Kentucky. She was well educated, and the instruction she gave to Isaac would, as you will see, benefit him in his later years. So they were a happy family, as many were back then, until Mama came down sick when us children were very, very young. And she caught typhoid fever and died suddenly in 1850. Around May 23rd, she passed. And as they were only married just 10 years and we were so young, I was barely 8, just turning 9. I was 8, John was 6, and Isaiah was 4. Papa was not only devastated, but understandably grief-stricken, and had some hard decisions to make. I think it was harder for him to stay and go on than it was to leave and seek his own place, and that's what Father did. He decided quite soon after Mama's passing in May. She is buried there in Ashland in the Old City Cemetery, the original one. He packed us up, and we were essentially fostered out. We were separated. So not only did we lose our mother, our dear mother, Father was planning to leave, and he was going to California. He was going to join his brother Josiah, who already came out during the gold rush and was well established in Shasta City. We, Father and I moved into the Gardner's house with them. Now, keep in mind, their oldest daughter had just passed, Nancy, very young. They had 5 boys themselves, so the house was quite full. So there wasn't room for all the children, and that's the reason these type of things happened. I went to live with the Gardners, my grandparents, which was a blessing, I think, to my grandmother, since she had just lost her only daughter. I think I was special to her, and we spent a lot of quality time together. My brothers lived close by, though they were fostered out to two young families, church and neighbor friends. One was the Scheddingers and one was the Whites, blacksmith in town. So Father said goodbye to the children, and in September he boarded passage through Panama and arrived in San Francisco in October. And he was on the steamship Oregon, which actually then in October of 1850, the steamship Oregon was the ship bringing news of the statehood of California statehood. So as you can imagine, Father coming into San Francisco Bay, there was quite celebration. There was a lot of ships, there was flags, gunfire. There was a big celebration the day he arrived on the ship with the other passengers. His ship actually, the Oregon, disembarked in the Sausalito port there. He made his way north first to Oak Bottom, and then joined his brother Josiah in Shasta City. Josiah had already set up a mercantile business, and as you might realize with the gold rush, it was quite booming, and that was the travel. Was Shasta City was a good place for miners to stop, get supplies, and head out to those the mines in northern California. So with Father gone, us children attended school as we should. The Roops were Church of the Brethren members, and we attended school and church as Father would want us to. When he left, he said he would send for us as soon as possibly he could. Though I think his encouragement was to calm us down and give us encouragement, but the reality of, in 1850, sending for children from an established town in Ohio to come to these frontier towns in Northern California, it was just not realistic. We were too young, we were too little, there was no hospitals, no schools, it just wasn't feasible yet. We didn't know that because we were so young, but we kept up the hope, which we did, that Father would soon send for us. And things went well in Shasta City. Father and Josiah were busy in their mercantile business. There was a hotel. Josiah was postmaster at the time. They both tried a little bit of mining and tried their hand at that too. Their investments are what paid off for them. They collected a lot of supplies, merchandise for their store, and the people passing through stayed in the Old Dominion Hotel, so there was a lot of income there. Now we're getting towards 1852 now, and Josiah had already been out here west for several years. He had a wife and children of his own. He was several years older than my father, 4 years older. And it was time for him to go home and visit. He would like to bring his wife and children out soon, too. So he booked passage. He left out of San Francisco, booked passage through Nicaragua to go back to Ohio and visit his wife and children, whom he missed, too. Unfortunately, as what happens in some of these countries, Nicaragua is one, it's a dangerous passage. Not only is it overland during this time in the 1850s, once you get off the ship, you must cross. It was usually done by mule and by boat. The natives would you would get on a boat and mule And so you can imagine days and days, days it would take to get across the isthmus. You would likely catch something, which unfortunately happened to Josiah. He got sick. He did make it onto the Atlantic Passage coming up, but was so sick with dysentery that he passed on the ship. They buried Josiah at sea near Cuba, near the passage to Cuba. So when word got back, not only had Papa lost his wife in 1850, he lost his brother in 1852. Luckily, he had sent for and thought about bringing Ephraim, his younger brother, his next youngest brother, out with him to assist. And Ephraim was interested in mining and all that was going on out in California. So in the travel, Ephraim was actually traveling through Panama on his ship at the same time that Josiah was going east. They didn't know what had happened. Ephraim did not know what had happened until he arrived in San Francisco and met up with his brother and my father. So when he arrived on the Northerner, Ephraim did meet up with Father and join him in Shasta. A younger brother named Jonas Roop, actually, their younger brother, had also seeking adventure, booked passage with the famous Dorland party out of Roseburg, and came via wagon train in 1853, out to California. Jonas Roop did not stay long, though. What he came and what he saw, he was a medical doctor by profession, and he returned quite quickly back to Iowa, was where they had lived. My younger brother John, there was talk of John and I, the Roop's grandparents, wanted to take us with them when they moved to Iowa. I was adamant that one move to Iowa, it was not a move closer to California, and that's not one that I wanted to take. I would rather stay, and I argued for that and won. I was stubborn, but I was grateful to my grandparents, and with them, the Gardners, I did move to the next county. They moved to Wayne County, which is right near Ashland. So I stayed there with my Gardner grandparents there in Wayne County, Ohio, and said goodbye to John. He moved with the Roops, the Roop grandparents, and the younger children. Keep in mind they had 11, the younger children, to Iowa. And, they did move a lot. There was opportunity for land, cheaper land, and Jonas was just finishing his studies, his physio-medical studies, to become a doctor. And my brother John was very interested in doing the same thing. So it was a good move for him. He could attend the same unregulated, back then those colleges were unregulated. And that's how the doctors learned. They'd go there for 2 years, and then they would do the rounds and actually learn as they went. So John moved to Iowa, and meanwhile, Ephraim did arrive out here with Father, and as luck would have it, and what happens in many of these towns that are built out of wood, fire struck. In 1853, the beginning of summer, 70% of Shasta City burnt to the ground. Most of Father's possessions were lost. He actually was postmaster at that time, and accounts have him without a thought for himself, but with the mail and all the ledgers, he was able to get all the mail and the ledgers out of the post office And what they did is take him into the middle of the street in town. So he saved all of that, but was unable to, most everything he had was gone. So he had a big decision. He'd only been gone for 3 years, and quite a lot's happened already. He had some decisions to make. Does he want to stay here? He was missing his brother. He sat one day, it was a nice summer day, and looked east and remembered a visit from William Noble the year before, in 1852, when he had come to Shasta. Remembered what William Noble said about establishing a new wagon route, an easier route, called the Noble's Trail, through the valley of the stream, now known as the Honey Lake Valley. There was no trading post. There was no supply for the settlers that were moving through. So Father resigned as postmaster in Shasta City, and in the summer, August, moved up to staked out a claim in Honey Lake Valley along a stream. He was looking for a place where wagons could stop and people could rest overnight. A good place with water, grass where the oxen and the cattle could rest. And he found it here in our town. And he staked out where he would build, put up his placards, and Isaac and my father and his brother traveled for the first 2 years. They wintered down in Shasta because of the cold, and the fort wasn't built yet. They couldn't winter here. So the first 2 years they came in the summers in the good weather, spring, summer, and fall, to establish and build the fort, which they did in 1854. Then for the next 2 years, they traveled back and forth, building and establishing. And by 1856, Roop House was established, and the trading station was here in the Nevada Territory. That was the beginning of Roop Town. The next year, in 1857, when the sawmill was finally established, because building houses for people to live was essential, so the sawmill was next. The Roop was established. The Roop House was established, as it was called. The sawmill was completed, and Papa began building his own house. There had to be a place to bring children, and so that continued. He was active in, I believe he was essential, and he was the one that set up the plat for the town. He donated land, his own land. He was very active in getting people through here and to stay here. Not only was it an easier route for the travelers, but it was a good place to set up and establish a town. Not only did we have good water supply, the cattle thrived here, rain. It was a wonderful place that Father thought, to make this his home and stay. So after that was set up and the house was built, Father was postmaster here in town and wrote to me, encouraging me to stay strong. He'll bring me as soon as he can. Complete your studies. As soon as it's possible, I'll bring you. Now, there was several things going on at this time that I wasn't aware of that made it a little bit impossible to bring children. It was better to wait. We were getting into 1860s and what was coming up. The Civil War. There was no communication until 1861. The Transcontinental Telegraph was established. It was just a lot safer, and there was a way to communicate when I was traveling back and forth of when I would arrive and how I was doing. So it was best to wait until Father decided about 1861 we would rendezvous and he would bring me out. I'm getting to be in my I'm 20 now, and girls my age were thinking about marriage, children. I poo-pooed it. I didn't want to tie myself down. My goal was California and reuniting with Papa. So in 1861 he did decide, but unfortunately the Civil War broke out. And my brothers, remember John's in Iowa, and Isaiah's still in Ashland County, and I'm in Wayne County. So Isaiah and I aren't too far apart, and we do see each other often. When Civil War broke out, both boys joined for the North. Isaiah on June 11th, 1861, he mustered out of the 23rd in Ohio. He was barely 15. He would turn 16 later in that year, as our birthdays were all in November. We turned, all three of us children, our birthdays were in November. Isaiah joined up at the 23rd, and this was in June, and in July, after their training was completed, they left for West Virginia. That's where they wintered. Their group wintered there. On July 24th of the same year, John enlisted out of Company K out of the 7th in Iowa. He was, with his medical experience, he served 4 years as a Union aide to General Grant. So both boys are now enlisted. The war is raging, and the plan is to come in 1861. But unfortunately, what happened in California in 1861 was a centuries bad flood. All of the Central Valley was flooded, and no travel could come through. In fact, the flood was so bad that the new telegraph that came in 1861 just came in. The floods were so bad in the Sacramento Valley that the water was up to the telegraph wires at the top of the pole. So 1861 was not a good year for us. I did wait until 1862 to make our plans. At about the same time I was planning to leave, the Battle of Antietam occurred in September, and Isaiah was wounded and lost his right arm. He was sent to a field hospital near Sharpsburg, and it's just a miracle he survived, because those field hospitals were the dirtiest, most unsanitary places on earth. Isaiah did survive and was sent with a lot of many wounded, and he wanted to stay in the service. They transferred him to Trenton, Ohio, where he worked office jobs and sentry duties, and that's what wounded soldiers, some did. Some went home to their families, but Isaiah didn't have a family to go home to. So he went to Trenton and worked in the provost marshal's office, is where he was. John was still on the march with Grant. Eventually that would take him through Georgia. He was slightly wounded, but John was fine. And meanwhile, I'm planning my big adventure. Only a couple miles from our house was the train station. So I packed up, got the train right there in Wayne County, and headed to New York. I just turned 21 on November 13th and left a few days later. I was excited. I was young enough not to be very scared or worried. I was just excited, and off I went. I made my way to New York. which was where you would catch the side paddle wheel steam schooners, and those were mail schooners that were set up to use and transport originally mail, and then with the gold rush, that was the main transport on those steamers back and forth down the coast, west coast, across Panama, and up the east coast. So when previous family had gone through Nicaragua and Panama, that was by mule. By the time I went, there was a railroad across the isthmus. So it was a lot safer and a lot easier. Another reason, well, they had me wait. I boarded on the Champion on November 21st out of New York, headed south. And can you imagine what we might have seen in the waters with the Civil War going on? We headed south to Panama, disembarked there, and made passage via train across the isthmus. It's approximately 50 miles. So it's not a big or long trip. It was a little bit safer, health-wise, making it across there. I was glad to finally make it to port and catch my other ship that would go north in the Pacific, the Orizaba, which I did. I embarked, and we plied the waters in the Pacific. And keep in mind, these ships would stop at various ports for resupplying, picking up mail, picking up and dropping off passengers. So that's what we did. We stopped at Acapulco, Monterey, San Diego, Monterey, and then up to San Francisco. So our ship, the Orizaba, arrived December 18th in San Francisco. We disembarked and made our way to secure the passage now overland to rendezvous with Father in Carson City. There was quite, since the gold rush, quite a transportation, a choice of transportation. There was overland by stage, the Delta and the waterways, taking steamers. That was the fastest way to go up to Sacramento and catch the overland over Carson Pass, which is what I did. That year of 1862, in December, the pass was clear, meaning the stage could go over it. Now, in some years, they had a, the snow would close it and it was impassable. The stage left Placerville every morning at 6 and arrived in Carson City at noon the next day. So I was ready at 6 to go on. Now, there was no stopping. You were on that stage until you got off in Carson City. They had stops, but you wouldn't want to get off long because they would leave you behind. If you stopped too long, they'd leave you. So it was an exciting journey, but it was a difficult journey. You couldn't stop, you couldn't get comfortable on those stages. You were crammed in with other people. It was very cold. The water, the food at those way stations over the Sierra for changing horses, you might find an old bucket of water and some old hardtack. That was what you would eat on the way. With the telegraph, Father knew he was in, the legislature had just convened in December of 62 there in Carson City, and so Papa waited for me. He knew I was coming and what stage I would be on. So I did arrive there, but I just missed Christmas. I came on the 26th of December, and I arrived in Carson City around noon, and I was nervous as I was 8 the last time I saw Papa, and it had been that long since we'd seen each other. I knew that I'd recognize him, because I thought he was so handsome, and I knew I'd recognize him right away. I was afraid he wouldn't recognize me, but of course, he described me getting off as a little slip of a girl, but I was a grown woman, and he felt that I looked quite a bit like my mother, which was dear to him. So we reunited there in Carson City. It was a wonderful reunion, and since it was the Christmas and holiday season, there was another stage. I arrived about noon. There was another stage leaving at 2 for Virginia City, and that's what we did. We spent some nice days together. A few parties and some nice food, and can you imagine what I hadn't tasted? That food and tasted so good. A warm, comfortable bed, new clothes. I was shown off to Papa's friends, and soon made my way to, a few days after recovering and relaxing, we made our way to the town named after me, Susanville. It was the first time I had seen it. It took 2 days to arrive, but early in January then of 1853, I did arrive here in this beautiful town, bearing my name, and I was witness to right away. I arrived in January in the Sagebrush War in February. I was trained and helped with wounded. Father and I moved right in and I took care of Father and he took care of me, and we were just so happy to be together that I was his hostess for his get-togethers and things. He was quite well known as he was the governor, and he was still referred to, even though he wasn't. He was retired from that post. He was referred to as Governor Roop. Our house was located. It was referred to then as Roop House, right up there on Main Street, 707 Main Street. And then after I was married, it was referred to as the Arnold House. So we got into it every day. It was a pleasure being with Father again. It's like we've never been apart. And shortly thereafter, I met my husband, my future husband, Alexander Thrall Arnold was his name. His friends and family referred to him as A.T., so I referred to him as A.T. also. We met, and as soon as I got there in 1853, in fact, he had just joined the Masons, and Papa was a Mason. He had just joined, and we went to several parties, and we got married December, just right after Christmas, December of 1864. And A.T. was several years my senior. He was born in 1833 in Delaware, Ohio. Even though it was Ohio, we had never met until we came out here. He had a sister and 2 brothers. His older brothers, Cutler and Leroy, had come out here during the gold rush in 1849. And A.T. had stayed back in Ohio, as he was the youngest, and planned to come out. He came out and joined his brothers. He did have a son back in Ohio that he named Leroy Dell Arnold, and that was his oldest son, which would have been about 9 or 10 when I married A.T. So we got married in 1864, and soon my first of 8 children would arrive, and it was a girl named after, Father insisted she be named after me, Susan. So we called her Susie. She was born in June of 1866, and soon after a son arrived named after my father, Isaac Newton Arnold was his name. So we were a busy family. Father enjoyed the children and was quite busy and involved in their upbringing. I had 2 sons right after that, Alexander and Thomas, and they were infants when they took sick, both infants. I had 2 babies, 2 years in a row, that died of childhood illness. During that time, the smallpox and the diphtheria was rampant with the little ones. So we were quite disappointed, distraught, and sad about losing those babies. But it wasn't long after that I had another little girl, Dora Maud, a son, Carl Victor, another son, Mark Eugene, and then my youngest, Medford Roop. And you heard a little bit about him earlier, so I don't know if I need to go into that about them. But I so enjoyed the children. I missed that. I missed that growing up, and I just so embraced my family and my children. They were everything to me. And in 1898, my strapping, beautiful 17-year-old son, Mark, he was in high school and just about done for the semester. And Hayden Hill was calling. We need help. They were booming in gold and busy. They needed teamsters and drivers for the wagons. So Mark took a break and went up to Hayden Hill and worked for a few weeks up there. Suddenly he came down sick, very sick. And the nice people at Hayden Hill took care of him until AT and I could get up there and pick him up. We brought him home, but he just didn't come around, and he died of appendicitis. There was no doctor, no surgeon. So my beloved Mark passed. He was almost 18. No matter how healthy you are, those things could happen. We had a nice funeral mass at the church, and then his school pals marched in their little band and marched down to the cemetery for him. So the town really came together, and I'm so appreciative of that. So as you can see, why I may have doted on my youngest, Med. I loved all my children, but he was the youngest. He was the sweetest, most precocious child. A little smaller of stature when he was small, so I think I may have babied him a little, but that's to be expected, isn't it? And so you already know that Med was such he was a wonderful, smart young man that grew up, coach and teacher, and he was so beloved by the school that you heard that they named Arnold Field after him. So today I'm going to wrap up by saying I appreciate you listening to my story, and I never had the urge to travel again and make Susanville my lifelong home, as you can imagine. Thank you, everybody. Sorry, I was a little nervous at first because you're the historians, and I thought, I got to get every date and everything.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, things I have never known, and I appreciate it.
Well, and I do research. I just want you to know that I research daily. I'm doing a biography on Susan for the Historical Society, and I've had help from many of you, and I thank you, and I will ask for your help in the coming days. It's very important to me to get facts and dates correct. So Tim Purdy's also helping me. Jack's helped me. Several of you have. I'll be working on that. I just started it last summer. And where it came about was the third grade days. That was my first, and it wasn't this extensive, but I tell the kids the dates, and I gloss it over a little bit. But with you, I can share all the gory details of, the tough travel. I didn't go into a lot of detail because I'm getting a little hungry, and I will come back again and share the new things that I learned about Susan and her life. Any questions?
We all read your book.
Yes, and I will. It'll be for the Historical Society, not for me. So it's going to be for you and for my precious there.
Sandy, this is wonderful, but when you were talking about, I thought, Wow, what food would you eat on a ship? I mean, they would stop. Did you have to buy the food? What?
Well, they did. The ships back then, because the travel was so well established, it was, they had holds where fresh water in the ship. It wasn't as rustic as coming on the stagecoach. They did have staterooms, you might call it. There was different, you could buy different cabins, so it wasn't horrible, the food. Now, they did have, when you were in Panama, they had hotels there, which is what the travelers often stayed at. The food was just bad, and even the steamships coming up to Sacramento, those were very comfortable, even at that time when she would have come through. Very comfortable accommodations.
Did your father ever see the two brothers again?
Good question. I skipped over some of that. I get nervous and kind of go too fast. Good question. No, Isaiah Bryan, who died at 18 of smallpox, Isaac didn't see him again.
Didn't John come out?
But John did. John was a physician. Actually, John came out twice to visit Susan. And he was he was very well liked. He was a country doctor. And
He was very loved.
He was very loved, and he came out twice, and actually right before he passed, he had just come to see Susan. He had been in Los Angeles, came up here, and he contracted influenza. In fact, he had it when he left. After he'd seen Susan, and not more than a few days, he passed from the influenza when he got home. So Susan, they did see each other. But Isaac, remember Isaac was only 46 when he passed.
Yeah, so young.
And he was very young, influenza. I don't like, in my presentation, I don't like to focus on passings as much as, that's why I stop before I say Susan passed, because you know she did, but we're all in the cemetery, and so, yeah, I like to focus on her life and her travels.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice.
You're welcome. And I'll share more with you as I learn more and write my notes. Thank you all. Let's eat. Fun fellowship and food.
That, we adjourn this part of the meeting into the best part of the meeting. And we all appreciate you coming today. Thank you very much.